Good morning, everyone. And we are about to start in just a minute or two. We're going to give everybody just a chance to tune in and get your audio set and your level set. So we'll be starting here momentarily. All right. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Future First North Fulton Summit. I'm Lori Geary. I'll be your host this morning. I am the executive producer and host of the Georgia Gang, which airs on Fox 5 at 8:30 on Sunday mornings. Many of you I know tune in. It's a very lively and fun political discussion about things going on all across Georgia. Before that, I was with WSB for 19 years, most of that time as a political and state government reporter. So very in touch with the issues that we'll be discussing today. It's hard to believe, but we were all together back in 2019. For those of you who remember, we were in person. And then the world changed very shortly after that. And we were introduced to this wonderful world of Zoom and figuring out how to do meetings. So it's nice to be here with you virtually. We'll see if we'll get back in person to do these events very soon. So, as many of you know, this organization continued to progress and really becoming the North Fulton Improvement Network, and that's a think tank of community leaders working to build public awareness of the challenges that really impact all of us. So, as a network of business, nonprofit, faith, and civic leaders, NFIN provides a broader lens than any one sector alone. We look at national trends, we look at our place in the region, and what is or what isn't happening to find solutions. So our goal is really to arm you with information and encourage you to share, discuss, and really just advocate as you choose. So to kick us off, we'd like to get your thoughts about housing in North Fulton. So if you could just take a few moments, we're going to answer a couple of quick questions that will appear on your screen. Number one, is housing affordability and availability an urgent issue? Can answer yes, no, or not sure, and that's why I'm here today. Also, do you believe local schools have an impact on your home value? Just choose one option here. Absolutely, major factor. Yes, somewhat of a factor, and not really a factor. So as you're answering those questions, I want to take some time to really thank our sponsors who have made this event happen today. First, Renaissance Bank has supported NFIN from the beginning. Bank leaders volunteer. You've probably seen them throughout our North Fulton community, serving on nonprofit boards and providing expertise in a variety of financial services. Also, the Wellstar Health System, a true community partner. Not only do they provide leadership across their service footprint, but North Fulton Hospital team members, well, they can be also found volunteering throughout our 6 cities. And one of our panelists, John Paul Kroom, is on the executive board for Roswell Inc., a public-private partnership for economic development, and on the board of the North Fulton Chamber of Commerce as well. And finally, the Community Foundation of Northeast Georgia, a force multiplier for supporting nonprofits, combining in-depth knowledge about local nonprofits with creative ways to leverage support for maximum impact. So, and I just want to remind everybody, this is your webinar. We want your input. So as we move through the program, we always welcome questions in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that chat for questions. We have a lot of information packed into this program to really make the most of your time with us. So we will start with Jack Murphy, chairman of NFIN. Jack serves as a senior account manager at the Metro Atlanta Chamber And like so many great leaders, well, he shared much of his time with nonprofit organizations like the Society of St. Vincent de Paul and Collective Impact. His work ranges from one-on-one mentoring to guiding growth strategies for initiatives like the North Fulton Improvement Network. Jack, welcome.
Thanks, Lori. I really appreciate the introduction. I hope that's written down somewhere because I'm not sure I've even heard all that. So thank you all for joining us today. Lori's done a great job of introducing what we do and the fact that we are a think tank. One of the terms that we use a lot is financial vulnerability, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in just a moment. But we believe that we have sort of 5 tenets that we use to guide our work. They are that it's in all of our best interest to have essential middle-income workers live closer to their jobs in North Fulton. We'll talk a little bit more about those terms, and we'll probably use terms interchangeably. But really what we want you to think about are early career workers that are essential to our well-being in North Fulton. There aren't many places for those folks to start their careers and live here. And some of our panelists will be talking about what that means to them as employers. We have to intentionally create these options. You'll hear John Hunt talking about some options that we really are lacking here in North Fulton, and we have to be more intentional about these things. The fact that we don't have more workforce housing impacts every one of us. With congestion, with reduction in business services, we probably all have a restaurant or a favorite place to go where they can't get enough staff to fully open, and those things hit all of us. And then also looking at the other end of the age bracket, the end that I'm at, people would like to, people want to live in the communities where they've lived for most of their lives. So they want to stay at home or live near family, find places to move to downsize, but still keep their faith communities, their jobs, or I'm sorry, their medical, and there are solutions to these situations. This is a little dense slide, but it's sort of the nucleus of what we are talking about. You'll see across the top here the different generations that are sort of broadly categorized by their age. And based on work that comes from the Federal Reserve in St. Louis and a few other places, these are the places, the housing prices that these generations can afford. And the median income comes from all of Fulton County. Most of the statistics that we talk about are specific to North Fulton County, but it's difficult to get this, excuse me, just for a sector of the county. So Generation Z, their median income, and if you look at the broad range, 15 to 24 years is pretty broad. So that median income is about $40,000. Millennials are closer to $91,000. But you'll also notice that this is a broad range too. When you look at people that are starting their career, most of them would be below this $91,000 median income. The single family inventory at this, I think we did this last August when we did a check of Zillow and to see what are the houses that are priced at this area, at this price point for these generations to live. There was no single family at this inventory and only 3 for this income bracket. So you can see we don't have enough housing. We don't have housing for these folks to live, nor do we have rentals. If you get to this upper end of 44 years and $91,000, there are rentals at $2,200, but we're much more likely to be looking for folks that are starting their career around $75,000, and there's very little inventory for them. This is the population in North Fulton at these age groups. We're going to take a minute with this slide as well, because it's a little complicated. If you look at the data here at the bottom, this is looking at people that are earning more than $200,000 and less than $200,000. If you look at the jump from 2015 to 2019 or 2021, you'll see that there's a huge increase in the number of folks that are earning more than $200,000. And that's reflected in this bottom line here. We went from 23,000 households earning $200,000 a year to almost 40,000. That's a pretty big jump. This top line is folks that are earning less than $200,000. You can see that's the bulk of the North Fulton population in terms of workforce, in terms of households. $131,000, almost $132,000 is sort of the bread and butter. But there's a subset of this, and that's folks that are earning less than $75,000 a year. And that number has declined. So the folks earning more than $200,000, that's about a 40% increase over 2015. The decline is significant in folks earning less than $75,000 a year. What does that mean? Well, for every person that moved into North Fulton County that's earning $200,000 or more a year, about 1.3, about 1 1/3 people moved out. Our premise is that the folks that Dr. Looney needs to employ, the folks that John Paul Kroon needs to employ are many times in this bucket, and they're leaving the county. We don't know where they're going necessarily, but we know they're moving out of the population, out of North Fulton. That's a problem for all of us. That's one of the reasons why we're having difficulty with bus drivers and all the other folks in this income bracket. They can't afford to live here, and they're leaving the area. What happens when they leave the area? Well, if they get a job, say in Forsyth County, they live in Forsyth County but still work in Fulton County, how long is it going to take them to realize that there are jobs there in Forsyth County that would reduce their commute? And to put a finer point on it, the area median income, that's for just North Fulton, is currently $115,000 a year, almost $116,000. That's a 20% increase over 2019. When you look, though, at two populations that are what we consider essential workers, teachers and public safety officers, they've both gotten huge increases since 2019. And that's great. That's wonderful for them. But and while it's close in percentage, it's still not enough to have them be able to afford housing in North Fulton. So while we certainly appreciate the efforts to keep up with the cost of living, we're not going to be able to just give raises to get folks to be able to live closer to their jobs, because there still is no starter inventory for these folks, or little or no inventory for them to be able to live closer to their jobs. And the panelists will talk a little bit about what that impact is, but that's the situation we're in. Here's a slide that just is kind of a microcosm of what we've been talking about. If you look at this slide, there's about you look at the folks, the jobs that are in North Fulton, and you combine these two numbers to come up with the amount of jobs that are in North Fulton, in the 6 cities. There are almost 300,000 workers that drive to jobs in those 6 cities. Many commute from inside Fulton County, but this 301,000 jobs, they can't be filled by people that live here. So about 94% of the people that work in the 6 North Fulton cities have to drive from other cities. These are some of the challenges we're facing with workforce, with the lack of workforce housing. But you may say, well, it's happening everywhere. And to a largest extent, it is happening in just about every city. But this is a rank of the top cities in the United States based on population size. And you can see we rank number 4 in rent appreciation. So we're not the worst in the nation, but that's still pretty bad. We've had a huge increase in our rents over the last 5 years. In home appreciation, we're number 1. Now, I've lived here for 30 years. I love the fact that I can look at my Zillow email every month and say, yay, look at us. But then I go out to a restaurant and have to wait twice as long as I did 5 years ago because the workforce isn't there. And in wage appreciation, we haven't kept up either. So yes, this is happening everywhere, but it seems in certain areas to be impacting us more than others. And so with that, let's turn it back to Lori to talk a little, to introduce our panelists and help us understand what this means.
Thank you so much, Jack. I mean, that really just lays it all out there with all of the numbers, and you can see those up close and personal and why we're having the challenges that we are when it comes to housing and the workforce. So thank you so much for all of that insight. I also want to just mention quickly, Valerie had a great question. Not sure if any of you are monitoring the chat, but she was wondering, what really incorporates, what are we talking about when we talk about North Fulton? And we're talking about 6 cities. So we're talking about Sandy Springs, Alpharetta, Milton, Roswell, and Johns Creek. So just to give you a little perspective. So now I would like to introduce John Hunt from MarketNSight. From speaking with local city councils to large international events, John has an impressive record, as you'll hear, of seeing emerging trends and forecasting key situations that really impact our housing markets and our economy. So, John, I'd just like to welcome you and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to share my screen if that's appropriate. It's not letting me right now. There we go. And I'm excited to be here and talk about a passion, a lifelong passion, which is housing for us. Jack, you could not have teed me up better. I was going to ask if you would go on the road with me. We speak an awful lot. So that was awesome. And we're going to touch on a lot of what he did. So I've been in the business for longer than I care to tell you, but right out of college in 1990, straight into the housing industry. I was too stupid to get out of it in the Great Depression or Recession of 2008, and here I sit. So we cover housing in depth in about 45 cities in the country, tracking trends, doing forecasting. And this is kind of the history of our forecasting successes. And I won't bore you, but just to say I was right, 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 I was right. And speaking of being right, you know, even a blind squirrel can find a nut every once in a while. So I reached back into our archives and said, what were we telling people in July of 2022? That was when interest rates just started going up. The Fed was beginning to raise rates to fight inflation, and there was a lot of talk around about this is going to bring massive inventory into the market as demand cools, and we're going to see an oversupply, foreclosures, a lot of apocalyptic predictions. What we said, and this is at a meeting that we did, we're very lucky to be asked back to speak in multiple places, especially this one. This is the Georgia Ready Mix Concrete Association, an excellent group. They've been meeting in Ponte Vedra annually for the last 57 years. It's somebody's dirty job. Somebody has to do it. But I talk to them every July with Rajiv Dewan from Georgia State. So what did we say a year and a half ago? Many pundits are saying that rising interest rates will help increase inventory as housing demand cools. We said the exact opposite is going to happen. Inventory is probably going to get worse. Now, why did we say that in the middle of 2022? The reason is this: the second biggest demographic group, the boomers, back and forth, first and second with the millennials, are sitting in their homes when they should be selling them to take advantage of skyrocketing prices. There's a lot of talk about a silver tsunami that's coming in this country with all these boomers start to unload their houses. If there were going to be a silver tsunami, It probably would have happened in 2021 when interest rates were 3 or less and home prices shot up 21%. That's a perfect reason for boomers to unload those homes and leave. And yet they didn't. And so why not? Now there was no interest rate problem back then. It was low. Where are they going to go? They have no inventory that they want, nothing that's different than what they're already living in. And so now, even if they could find a place to go, they're not going to trade their 3% mortgage in for a 5. Don't you wish rates were still at 5 like they were in July of 2022? And they're certainly not going to do it when rates shot up to 8 at the end of last year. And they're not going to do it either at the current rate at 6.77. So this is causing a massive constraint on resale inventory in our country. And it's not just that they don't want to. We were the first to kind of come up with this lock-in effect, golden handcuffs, people are now calling it, where you don't want to give up your 3% mortgage for a 6. But even when rates were at 3, this massive demographic group chose to sit and age in place because, in my opinion, they had nowhere to go. So, is there a housing shortage? And it's interesting. And if you're in the industry, you know that's true. But if you're not, it's not so clear cut. So, there was a recent study done or a survey done of registered likely voters. One of our associates did it. And they asked the question, is there enough housing supply? And 66% of the registered likely voters on that survey said there's plenty of housing inventory for everybody. And so that's just not the case. There was already a housing shortage before the pandemic started. I'll show you that. The pandemic made it worse. And the current environment with interest rates increasing and being high, 23-year highs, is only going to deepen our inventory crisis. It's not going to help. So when you look at what's going on in the country nationally, and I'll tell you what's going on in North Fulton, but when you hear people say there is a shortage of homes of housing, 4 to 6 million there's a lot of different ways to calculate that. One of those is you look at, population versus housing starts. So this chart is population versus housing starts. Population on the right, housing starts on the left. And you'll notice in 2000 to 2006, 2005, as population increased, so did housing starts. That makes sense. You have more people, you need more houses. But that relationship completely and utterly broke apart starting in 2006 at the Great Recession, and we've never recovered. Population has gone up every year since, and yet housing starts, and this is total housing starts. This would be multifamily, apartments, single family, everything. So the total housing starts is lagging far behind the population growth in our country. After a decade or more of underbuilding and underdeveloping since the last recession. So Atlanta overall is really a barometer for the rest of the country. We're the top 4 housing markets in the country. And so what's going on here is typically going on pretty much everywhere. This is inventory going back to just before the pandemic. In October of 19, you can see the pandemic, that little hump there in February, March, and April, where we shut the government down, shut the economy down. But inventory was dropping very quickly leading up to the pandemic. So before the pandemic began, we really were experiencing kind of a boom in housing, which was based on a demographic group that had largely been absent for the last 10 years as they, matured and got a real job and moved out of their parents' basement and all that kind of good stuff, paid off student debt. The millennials really kicked in as a buying force in 2019, and they were taking a lot of inventory off the table before the pandemic. The hump there is the pandemic, but as soon as we opened the economy back up in May of 2020, we added to the millennial demand a new demand created by the forces of the pandemic, which is nesting, need a school space, need an office, need to move. And then the months of supply is on the right. So in our industry, normal months of supply is 6. It's been that way since time began. If you're at 6, everybody's happy. It's not a buyer's market. It's not a seller's market. It's not, you're not crashing prices. You're not raising prices absorbently too high. And so when you're below that, you need additional inventory and you're going to have upward pressure on pricing. And right now, Atlanta's at 2.3 months of supply. So we've never even recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Before the pandemic, we were just above 3 months of supply. That's half what it should be. And that's because we had a decade of underbuilding, underdeveloping, and this is the hole that we built ourselves into. And the pandemic housing boom just absolutely sucked all of the inventory out of the system. We've never seen months of supplies at 0.7. And we've seen a little bit of an increase in inventory as interest rates have pushed up dramatically, but not what you would think we would have seen because the demand that exists, because we do still have demand, is still outpacing our ability to supply. So we do a math formula. I mean, my opinion is great. I love my opinion. Doesn't mean anything. Math is science. So we do a mathematical formula to predict, not predict, to calculate how much additional inventory would Atlanta need on top of what's sitting there just to get back to normal, back to 6 months of supply. So I'm going to add inventory, theoretical pretend inventory in the system until 2.3 months of supply becomes 6. And that's a big number. So in Atlanta right now, to get back to 6 months of supply on an annual basis, we would need another 47,000 homes just to get back to normal. What that means is if those homes existed, if you could wave a magic wand, if we actually did have a silver tsunami and all those, which wouldn't even touch this, but if you could wave a magic wand and cause 47,000 additional units of inventory to appear in the market, they would all be absorbed in 12 months at the current absorption rate. And the problem with that is, at least on the new construction side, is we're only going to put about 12,000 lots on the ground. It's very difficult to do this in Atlanta, much more difficult than other cities, as Jack was pointing out. It's more expensive to develop in Atlanta than it is anywhere in a 300-mile radius around us, about double the cost to develop. And it has nothing to do with labor, materials, any of that stuff. It's additional government regulation that the other cities around us do not have that makes them extremely competitive when it comes to offering attainable housing. So why do we need more housing? Well, I don't know. Every month last year, we added jobs. We blew the forecast out crazily in some months. When you add all these up, the actuals, we added 3.1 million jobs last year in this country. Those people need a place to live, and it's not there for them in many cases. Let me show you what's going on in Atlanta that really concerns me as far as us being competitive and bringing industry and corporations and factories and jobs to the city.
John, could I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Would you hit the more button up top right there?
Yeah.
That might get rid of that toolbar that we're seeing.
Oh, you're seeing a toolbar? How do I get rid of it?
Hit more and then let's see. Floating meeting controls, hide floating meeting controls.
Ah,
There we go. Thank you.
like I said, technology is great when it works. So is that better?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. So I'll know that for the future. So I want to look at what's changed in the last 2 years in Atlanta in terms of the price points available for buyers. It's been a radical shift. Our chief economist has said that the new starter home price these days is 300 plus or minus. That's where most people can afford a home based on their incomes and debt ratios and down payments. And the markets that are going to grow, and I really believe this because I've seen it and it's happening right now. The markets who are going to grow are where builders can add that entry-level product because that acts as a draw for companies and individuals and also factories and industry. So let's look at where Atlanta stands and how we're doing it, being able to supply that starter home at even, I mean, forget 150 or 180. Let's talk about 350. Can you buy a $350,000 house in Atlanta today? I'm going to show you the new construction based on the top high school districts for new home sales. There are over 200 high school districts in the city of Atlanta. We cover 29 counties. How do I know there are over 200 high school districts? Because I have no life and I stayed up and counted them for you. So here is the top 15. Here are the top 15 high school districts from 2 years ago, 2021, the units sold and the average price. So 2 years ago, if you want to use around 350 as the benchmark, 10 of these high school districts were places where somebody could go and buy a house with a 3 in front and even a 2 in some cases. And that was okay. How does this chart look like today in 2023? The most recent data we have, we've lost all 10 of those. We've got 0. So this is what's going on in terms of upward pressure on price, lack of supply and artificially constrained supply absolutely causes a lot of this overpricing that we're seeing. And it's something that really the supply side has to be addressed. The Fed tried to address it by their term is destruction of demand by raising rates to the fastest rate in the history of the Fed to 23-year highs. It really didn't work because all of the demand that we have right now, we had 3 million jobs. It's real demand. It's not the fake demand that we had in 2008, where if you had a 520 credit score and just got out of San Quentin, we would put you in a house. These people have jobs and need a place to live, whether it's for rent or for sale. And so I think that supply side has got to be addressed. And it's not just all price points. There is nothing available for the most part anymore in most cities, but especially in Atlanta, at or below that 350 level, which is where most people can afford a home. So in 2016, sales under 350 were fully 70% of all sales that occurred. Today, it's flipped. It's only 30% and dropping. So how do we build homes in the 300s? And let's specifically talk about North Fulton. Can you even get to the 300s in North Fulton? Well, let's use calculus and regression because, you know, that's all that stuff I learned in college and thought I would never use and ended up using it every day. So everyone stay in school, please. So you're looking at Roswell High School District. This is a regression. You've got price on the left axis, square footage on the bottom. The blue dots are all the resale closings in Roswell High School District, and this is a 12-month previous. And the blue line is the regression or the median value or the midpoint of all those resales. All of the new construction are the red dots, creating the red regression line. And the yellow line is 20% above resale. What we found in all 45 cities that we track is new construction really stops absorbing if it's priced more than 20% above resale. And you can see that in Roswell High School District, you're slightly below that ceiling of 20%, maybe 15. But I also want you to see where the red dots are. The red dots don't even start on a square footage basis until we're north of 2,000 square feet. All of those resales are the only option for people who might want a smaller home right now. And as you know, some of those homes are 60-year-old, 70, 80-year-old brick ranches like I grew up in with a carport. And so that's the only option that people have now in that square footage range. But I want to show you that's where zoning today has forced new construction to be. In minimum of 2,000 square feet is a standard that I hear across the country. Minimum lot sizes drive prices up. And so new homes are forced to play in that plus 2,000 square foot range against resales that we built 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it's hard to compete with those resales because the basis in the land was a lot less. So it's hard to do that. So that's why you don't see a lot of red dots. You have a lot of really high quality resale that is still trading. So in the sub 2,000 square foot category, there's zero new home activity. So how do we get price point down? Let's talk about it. So right now, today, if you have a house in Roswell High School District and it's around 2,500 square feet, the regression value for new construction is 700 grand. And that's, you can't change these lines. Market forces drive these lines based on people's incomes and desire to be in a certain high school district. And by the way, high school district is the number one factor that people look for. So at 2,500 square feet, we're at 700. That's a long way from anything attainable. How do you reduce your price? If you look at my chart, there's really only one way to mitigate price. You have to move down and to the left on this chart and get smaller, and your price point drops respectively, accordingly. So let's talk about a 1,500 square foot house, which we don't build. What would that home be? Even at 1,500 square feet, the market price right now, if you were to build new construction, 1,500 square feet, would be 500 grand. So how do we get below 4 in North Fulton? You got to go down to 1,000 square feet. And that, based on market forces and demand, would sell at 386. So what we get a lot of is we don't want our values being attacked or dropping based on building higher density or smaller homes. And in the surface, that looks and makes sense. 700, if you start building $386,000 homes, it's going to bring my price down. That's absolutely not the truth. Unless you're under industry, you don't really kind of think about this, but prices are set by really appraisers. And no appraiser worth his salt is going to go into a 1,000 square foot house and use it as a comp to price evaluate your 2,500 square foot house. He'd lose his job. And the truth is, as your house becomes smaller, it's not just about the actual price you're paying, it's what you're getting for that price. Price per square foot is critical. So let's compare price per square foot, which is the metric on the 700,000, 2,500 square foot house. The price per square foot on that house is 280. The price for the 1,500 square foot house is higher at 333. And if you could build 1,000 square foot residence for somebody and come up with product for it, which we'll talk about, that's $386 a square foot. It's more expensive as you go down. It's actually helping values when you have the ability to build smaller and increase your price per square foot. The problem is, why isn't there product below 2,000 square feet in most of the country? And it's because I think our zoning is kind of based on the way the world worked 20, 30 years ago. And we just haven't been able to change it yet. We've had a lot of change over the last 20 years with a Great Recession and a pandemic. And, it was just difficult during those recovery years. But the world doesn't look like this anymore. 2000, 20 years ago, I was 35, I had hair, had kids going in school, and I was part of that big, massive group. This is an inverted barbell called the boomers. We were the biggest consumer group. We all had kids, either in middle school, elementary, or high. We were at the peak earning potential, and we needed that single family detached house. And the zoning reflected that appropriately in our country. The issue is today doesn't look like this at all, because I certainly don't look like I did when I was 35. What does the world look like today? It's the opposite. It's actually a barbell. So the two biggest consumer groups these days are the millennials on the bottom of the barbell and me, the boomers, on the top. So the smallest constituent among home buyers is really that traditional school-driven family buyer. The two big demographic groups are on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and they have a lot in common, by the way. The millennials and the boomers, they both love to party. The boomer just kicked his last kid out of the house. Every night's a party. As a matter of fact, I think they party more and harder than the millennials, but they get along very well. And as I speak to city councils and county commissions, whenever we have the opportunity to be proactive and specific and intentional, as Jack said, I think has to be considered. Because these are people that you want more of in your community. By the way, they're the two biggest consumer groups we should consider giving them some place to live, but you want them for a host of reasons. Number one, they have all the money. And why do they have all the money? Because they got no kids. If you've got kids, you're broke. I know. I had 4. What was I thinking? So these two demographic groups are very low drag when it comes to taxing a city's services. They just would like to Uber to your downtown and go to your craft brewery and Uber back. And I think that we're not intentionally building product that these two demographic groups want or need. And that's why we have a frozen housing market right now, because they have nowhere to go. So the millennial is tired of his 800 square foot apartment. He doesn't really need a 3,500 square foot house. They may just be getting married and they're not going to have kids ever, maybe, or for a long time. The boomer has been sitting in that traditional single family home for the last 30 years, raising his kids. He just kicked his last kid out of the house. And now he wants something different that's smaller. Somebody else cuts the grass, or there's no grass to cut even. And I lock the door and go play. The problem is that doesn't exist. And so we sit. Age 55 isn't what it used to be. We're living longer. We're more active for much longer than we've ever been in this country. And I think that is a massive sea change that we've seen. I have gotten so much mileage out of this joke. I've been using it for 5 years. I've had to update it. So 5 years ago, I said 55 isn't what it used to be. There was Tom Cruise filming Fallout, Mission Impossible at 55. It looks pretty good for 55. Well, 5 years went by and I got a lot of usage out of this joke for 5 years. And then he turned 60. So I had to change my joke. And not only did he turn 60, he did Top Gun and broke the world with absolute crazy numbers. And so Tom Cruise at 60 still looks pretty daggum good, is doing stuff like this.
I'm running out of altitude, so I gotta get back to work. We gotta get this shot. You have a very safe and happy holiday. We'll see you at the movies.
Are you kidding me? That's crazy. And not only can Tom Cruise at 60 do his own stunts, he can also run up and down stairs in a townhome, and would probably like to have that option if we would build it, or other options. But now I've had to go past Tom Cruise. He's old news. It's not just 55 is the new, it's not 60. Now 72 is the new 55, because we have a new example. We've got the Golden Bachelor. Looks pretty darn good for 72, even though I'm sure he's had some nips and tucks, but he looks pretty daggum good for 72. So I want to compare 72 today to what 50 looked like back in the 80s. So here's Wilford Brimley filming Cocoon at the age 50, 22 years younger than the Golden Bachelor. All right, that's about all I can take of that. So let me ask you a question. What's more dangerous? Tom Cruise jumping out of a helicopter, or Gary trying to date 20 people at the same time? I think Gary wins on this one. So 72 is the new 55. And of course, they're going to live happily ever after. We'll see. So again, we've got the two biggest consumer groups converging into what they want in housing, kind of in the middle. It's not the 800 square foot, 600 square foot studio apartment. It's not the 3,000 square foot detached single family home. That's what we've been building for the last 40 years, pretty much only building. So it's that middle square footage that we're seeing. Unfortunately, that middle square footage that we're looking for, 1,200 to 25 to 22,000 square feet, is missing. And I'm going to talk real briefly about missing middle housing. It's something I'd never heard of until about 5 years ago, and I've been in this business 35 years. I thought I knew it all. Never too old to learn. And so this has been a journey for us, understanding how zoning was created. Missing middle is essentially all over the country. It's the way we used to live in our country more than 100 years ago. Until 100 years ago, this is how we lived. We had all kinds of multiple diversity of product. But today's zoning is really polarized in that you're looking at this diagram. It's either detached single family, there's nothing in the middle, and then you do apartments. So that's pretty much all we ever approve is detached single family and apartments. All that cool stuff in the middle that we used to build in this country over 100 years ago hasn't really been built. It's duplexes, triplexes, courtyard apartments, bungalow, townhome, just a variety. And every old city, every part of old city, every old part of a city has missing middle in it from over 100 years ago. And if you think about it, let me give you an example from Grant Park, a highly desirable place to live. Everybody wants to be there. Values are going up. What kind of product is in Grant Park right now? Well, it's a 1930s bungalow that's a single family home. And maybe a doctor or lawyer, somebody lives in there. And right next door, and I took these pictures about a year ago in Grant Park, right next door to this single family home is what looks like the same home, except for if you'll notice how many doors are at the top of the steps. Two, this is a duplex. So we've got a doctor or lawyer living in the detached home, and right next door, maybe who teaches his children or serves him in the local bar is living in the duplex and renting. Understand that this is illegal today. You don't mix for sale, owner occupied, and rentals, but it's the way we used to live. People love this kind of walkability and diversity of incomes and stratas. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about getting back to. Well, why don't we zone this way anymore? And I got to tell you, when I first heard this in 2018, it was a shocker to me. I didn't believe it. I had to go prove it. And I would encourage you, if this shocks you, what I'm about to tell you, I encourage you to go trace it down and track it down and prove it to yourself. In the 1920s, the White House convened a task force to push cities to adopt zoning codes 100 years ago. So most of the members were very outspoken segregationists, and zoning was seen as a method to keep certain neighborhoods white and to circumvent civil rights laws. And this is how zoning started in our country. We still do it today, and we don't even know why. I would call this government sanctioned socioeconomic bigotry, and it's exclusionary. Don't trust me. The book that's the authority on this is Color of Law, Richard Rothstein. I warn you, though, be careful. If you read this, it will change your life. It will change your outlook on a lot of things. And it changed really the direction of our company. We're actually witnessing an all-out war being waged on housing affordability and attainability in our country. It's not just rising materials, rising rates, labor. All that stuff could go away as an issue in Atlanta tomorrow, and you still couldn't build a $350,000 house in Atlanta, mainly because restrictive and exclusionary zoning is putting a cap on supply. And that's how we become competitive, is by changing that. I really believe attainability, workforce housing is the defining issue of our time. Don't kid yourself. There's nothing more important. Forget geopolitical things going on right now. I'm talking about just our country. So why do I say that it's the defining issue of our time? Well, let's talk about other industries. Is there a crisis in other industries? I don't know. Do we have a crisis and shortage of supply for office space in this country? No. The pandemic has caused all of them to get foreclosed on. We've got nobody in those office spaces. Maybe we should convert them to housing. Do we have a critical shortage of retail space in this country? No. A lot of those are being converted as well. How about warehouses? No, you can go up 75 and 85 and they're all empty. We overbuilt them. I think we can all, to some degree, come to an agreement that lack of housing is the single biggest defining issue of our time. And we are starting to see some progress. And I'm excited about this. This is the part of my presentation where I used to show you where we got shot down and we couldn't get, affordable housing. No, this is catching on around the country right now. And it's not starting where you think it would be, where a lot of trends start on the extreme West Coast or the extreme Northeast Coast. This is a revolution going on in zoning right now in housing, starting in the heartland. The flyover states have gotten this, and they're showing us how to do it. And I'm excited about it. The first missing middle ground up community was in Nebraska, those radical Midwesterners. So Nebraska is doing this. And what makes missing middle appealable to a lot of cities and counties and municipalities is it's density that doesn't look like density. So you've got what looks like a mansion in that mansion apartment, but you've got 5 units there. And so it fits in great with the streetscape, looks great. It accomplishes density at the same time. So this is kind of what's going on. So Nebraska is embracing this. Austin has completely changed their zoning to allow for so-called missing middle, increasing housing stock in existing neighborhoods, row houses, townhomes, tri-fourplexes, garden homes, cottage courts. And then probably the one example that I think we should all pay attention to, and Minneapolis was ahead of the game. Before the pandemic in 2017, they eliminated zoning that only allowed for single family homes, and they allowed for missing middle. The result has been in Minneapolis a massive increase in inventory and a state effect on price increases. And as a matter of fact, you can read this. The rent growth since 2017 in Minneapolis has been 1% because they have plenty of inventory, plenty of places for people to live. They're affordable. And the rest of the country has seen rent growth go up at 31%. This is simple economics, folks, supply and demand. And then very excited about some stuff going on locally. Board of Commissioners made an update in Gwinnett, which allows for duplexes, triplexes, similar types. Atlanta is losing its affordable edge in the competition against other metro areas for economic development. This issue is compounded by limited housing inventory and high mortgage rates. So this is starting to catch on. It's not the only solution to attainability and affordability, but it is a very elegant, beautiful solution because it kind of checks all the boxes. It's something that we need to consider. And that's my presentation, and I'll turn it back over and appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you, John, so much. Wow, that's some incredible information. It hits home because my 81-year-old dad lives in Johns Creek in a beautiful 55 plus community. And yes, he's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, but some of those numbers, I feel like you're talking about New York or San Francisco, and here we are talking about North Fulton. So, wow. Okay, so your questions are coming in, so thank you so much. We're going to get to them in just a few minutes, but I want to add 2 more panelists to answer some of your questions as well. These are 2 key leaders in North Fulton County. John Paul Kroom is the president of Wellstar North Fulton Hospital. He's been a C-level leader in healthcare for almost 20 years, and as we've mentioned, he's a very active volunteer in our North Fulton community for almost 7 years. Also, a familiar face to many of you, Dr. Mike Looney. He's the superintendent of Fulton County Schools. He's a retired Marine with decades of education experience, all of which was needed when joining the school system that fateful year just before the pandemic. So I want to bring you 2 in for questions first. And John Paul, I'll start with you. We've heard from so many healthcare organizations about the lack of workforce availability. Is that your biggest challenge? And give us some perspective there.
Thanks, Lori. I appreciate being on the panel today and being part of this discussion. Yeah, I think that is an accurate statement. Workforce is a challenge for healthcare. I know that every industry is unique. With healthcare, our uniqueness, which I'll talk about as we discussed this morning, we are subdivided into so many different levels of training. I'll probably have 50 different categories of individuals working at the hospital, and it's a challenge in different areas for different reasons. So it goes everywhere from housekeepers to technicians to nurses to to nurse practitioners to physicians. So and some of those areas are much more challenging than others. And it's something that we have to, there's not one fix for everything, but it is something we need to, that we think about, especially when we're trying to recruit and understand what it is that is drawing people or keeping people away.
All right, thank you for that. I also have to give North Fulton a shout out because I'd never been there before. And one of my best friends had a brain aneurysm, picture of health, 52 years old, and just out of the blue, and had the best care. She was actually taken by ambulance from Milledgeville to your hospital in the stroke center, and you all should be very fortunate to have that center there. And now I'm thinking about, where are those doctors and nurses, where the nurses, the techs, where are they commuting from? So this really hits home, but I want to give a shout out to your facility because it was incredible for her, and she's doing very well.
Thank you, Lori.
Okay, Mike, let's talk about the data that shows that while staffing is a challenge across the region, North Fulton often has more vacancies than the rest of the county. So can you tell us kind of what you're finding in that area? Oh, we need to unmute you.
I apologize. I think
Yeah.
our findings are consistent with what has been said already by the panel. We have a recruitment challenge because the workforce is shrinking as it relates to educators specifically. Fewer students are going to post-secondary institutions pursuing a career in education. More importantly, though, if you look at our data, we have a very difficult time of keeping our employees, retaining them. And so we actually did a heat map about 3 months ago and learned that 50% of our employees live outside of the county, outside of Fulton County. That's not including the teachers or workers that might live, south and go north or one city to other. 50% of our workforce lives out of the county. And when we talk to them about the whys, it's because we can afford housing. And then, as one of the panelists said, it doesn't take long for our employees to do the math. If you're spending an hour and a half one-way commute from a neighboring county to get to your location, as soon as a job becomes available closer to home, then they're the first in line to accept that job. So it's not just recruiting, but it's also about retaining our talent. So those are two critical issues that we're facing.
Thank you, Dr. Looney. I want to take a question now from Heather Terry. She's a good friend of mine. Hi, Heather. For the big builders, John Hunt, let's talk about this. Is there a way that they could be required to build a certain percentage of affordable housing or senior housing in each neighborhood that they develop?
It's the dynamic is interesting, and we do a lot of feasibility studies for planned, communities that are planned or being looked at. Builders really kind of have their hands tied based on minimum square footages and minimum lot sizes. I can tell you that there a huge percentage of our builders would love to build something affordable, but to do that, as you saw in my chart, you have to build something smaller. That's the only way. And the minimum square footages and the minimum lot sizes are keeping us from being able to do that, even though the builders would readily do it if it were available. And in those cities that have made that change in zoning, builders go in and absolutely begin to build that. So it gets, the builders would like to do it, but their kind of hands are tied based on what the local zoning rules are.
Okay, thank you for that. And just to let everybody know, this presentation will be shared on YouTube as soon as we complete the presentation. So for those of you asking, will this presentation be shared? It absolutely will, because this is such great information. John Paul, Mike, also, and we'll start with John Paul first, but what kind of housing do you think your recruits are really looking for? Is it single family homes, multiplex, owned, rented? What are you finding?
Yeah, so it's a for us it's a multiple answers. When we first started looking at this a few years ago, I mean, obviously the first thing you go to is you look at your lowest paid workers, and that becomes your initial attention. And so we worked through that. We're looking at, we have housekeepers, food and nutrition servers, we have transporters, we have certified nursing assistants. Those are in our lower pay brackets. And I think those individuals, and one of the things I can share later is I've kind of mapped out where everybody lives, and it's sort of scattered across the entire Atlanta metropolitan area. And we know most of those individuals drive, although there are a few that live here. And I say drive, most of them are taking MARTA or other types of public transportation to get here. And then we have another section of individuals who are our technicians and our nurses and people that are, making, a little less, a little more than 100,000 a year. And, these are the individuals that, look to move closer to where they work. And the challenge that we see with both of these groups, with the first group, those that, for instance, are living in West Atlanta and take MARTA up here, we have a lot of turnover there, mainly because they will, we do have to pay a higher rate to get people to come out to the suburbs. But we also know that if somebody can cut, an hour and a half, 2 hours off of their commute every day and work somewhere for $1 less an hour, they will do that. And so we lose people all the time there. The other group, our technicians and our nurses, this has taken a little bit longer to try to figure out what the challenge is. But I believe that the problem that we're seeing is younger people who are just entering the workforce in these professions. They are, maybe they're just recently married. They're looking for a home, and I think one of the arguments is always, well, we have plenty of apartments here in North Fulton, but these individuals are looking for their first home. I think, starter home that John was talking about. They want a home with a neighborhood. They want a pool. They want a nice school system, and the challenge is it's more of the choice that these individuals are making. They're first choosing, okay, where can I afford to live, and then where can I work close? And so, in my industry, there's hospitals everywhere. So, we have a hospital out in Dallas, Georgia. That hospital is much more likely to have a home for these individuals, and they can have a nice life in that community. And they don't even think about North Fulton. It's just not even a thought in the first place. And so our challenge is trying to find people that live close to here, are willing to drive here, and that's kind of the problem with that segment of the population.
Dr. Looney, are you finding similar issues because there are schools everywhere as well?
Yes, about 30% of first-year teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. So those individuals, probably aren't looking to purchase a home right away. They're wanting to see if this gig is going to work out for them, unless they're married and they have a spouse that's, a secondary source of income. So I think in the rental space, there's a need for affordable rental that our employees feel safe in, and that they have the appropriate, lifestyle accommodations, pool, fitness center, that sort of thing. Walkability is a big thing. And then for those employees that we are able to recruit from other places 5+ years, they're looking for a home that's affordable to them. Earlier it was shown that a beginning teacher makes $56,000 a year, probably caps out in the 70s. So there's not a lot of upward mobility as far as compensation goes. So they're looking for something that's affordable, that they're willing to raise their children in the neighborhood and work and play in, close to home.
John, how about another question from one of our audience members? Antonio Quiles says, could a mass rezoning of built units help solve this issue? I don't know if that's realistic. And, we always hear, everybody's for affordable housing, but just not in my backyard, right? Not in my neighborhood, right? How does that play a part?
So of homes that are already built, rezoning them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the misconception that we get when people in cities decide that we need to discuss affordable and missing middle housing is that you're going to change my house, and we're not. I mean, if you're in that house that's $700,000 and has a big yard, nobody's going to come and tear it down and put 7 houses on it, you're there. We're just talking about additional housing that might be put on, very little raw land left in North Fulton, but goodness knows, we've got a lot of retail that needs to be dealt with that could be turned into housing. We've got a lot of office space that's empty that could be turned into housing. So it's not that you're not doing single family, it's just that we're adding additional options that are attainable, affordable into the mix that still keep the values up, keep the streetscapes. And I think, what you get in most of the city council kind of commission meetings is, just a fear that it's going to change where they live, and it's not. So it's different.
Okay. Dr. Looney, if you could kind of give us some secrets as to like what strategies you're using to recruit. I mean, that's got to be tough because if there's a commute, then you're obviously having to offer other options in terms of pay, benefits, bonuses, that kind of thing.
And we're actually offering stipends, signing bonuses up to $5,000 for various employee groups and hard to fill positions. But once again, that's not a sustainable model. The truth is all other districts are doing the same thing we're doing. And so the problem is the applicant pool is shrinking, and they want to once again work and play in close proximity. And so if housing affordability is not an option, then they'll commute for a short period of time, but they will their resume will remain active until they find a place close to them.
John Paul, what about you? Any secrets that you see are working in terms of recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, there's certain, it has to do with income level. I always joke, I've worked in multiple different markets. I've been here for 7 years, and this is probably the easiest place to recruit physicians and specialists because, they can afford to live in the market, but they also want to live here. And I think that's a real positive about our market is, we pull people from all over the United States, from Mayo Clinic, from Cleveland Clinic, from Johns Hopkins. They all want to come to Atlanta and they want to come to the North Fulton area to live. But so there are some sectors that are easy to recruit, but the ones that are difficult, especially those, I think John called it the middle, the missing middle. Those are we do the same thing. We're offering sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses, other types of differentials, but the same that the school systems are doing, the other hospitals do the same thing. So it's not sustainable. It's just not. And the thing we recognize here, and being in an urban area, because we are compared to most places in Georgia, not many people like to drive. There are a few that I talk to, they're like, oh, I love my hour commute, but not very many, and they'll look for reasons to not do that anymore. In other parts of the country where I've worked that are more rural, people don't have a problem, driving, 45 minutes and, on an expressway that's not busy. But here it's just not, it's just not sustainable long term. And we do, we fill positions sometimes with people that live as far away as northwest Georgia. But we know when we're hiring these people, it's probably not going to be a long-term sustainable solution.
Okay. John, lots of questions coming in about, turning commercial space into residential. Ted Schwartz says, turning office into
Saw
housing
that question.
is difficult than it appears. And then,
Absolutely.
how realistic is
Yeah.
it to convert? I mean, I see like 2 Peachtree Street is being converted.
Yeah, absolutely. It's problematic. And we've worked on some conversions from office to apartments. I mean, to apartments or condos. It takes a massive amount of capital. It's not a small undertaking. I think what I'm thinking is as you drive around around Atlanta, you're going to see, deserted strip centers that have been there for decades or 10 years or 5 years that are just sitting there. No, you don't convert that. You tear it down and start over. But I think that's the zoning becomes less problematic because you're taking something that was zoned for retail and converting that to some higher density missing middle type product. And that's a lot less expensive. The demo on that, you just demo it and start over. So there's an awful lot of opportunity there that's available. But you're right, to take a high rise and convert it is a massive undertaking.
Dr. Looney, this is a question from Dave Schmidt. He's asking, what is happening to school enrollment given the demographic changes and little ability to provide housing for young families?
Yeah, so it's fluctuating. I will say nationally, school enrollment is on the decline. Birth rate has declined. And so our population is aging. So I would say it's fluctuating. The people that are still in the system, coming to the system, are chasing ratings, right? So where there's perceived quality, people will move or do whatever they have to do to try to get into that. And I saw another question about extended stay hotels. We even have that, for the sake of sending my child to a good school, I'm willing to stay in an extended stay or some temporary environment for the benefit of my children.
John, do you want to weigh in on that also, in terms of, school enrollment and what we're doing for young families? Is there a fix to any of this?
Yeah, again, it's we and I keep telling people, how do we convince city councils, county commissions to do a higher density product and help affordability? And the truth is they're already doing it to a large extent. Without even thinking, most municipalities in the last 5, 6, 7 years have been allowing product as little as 400 square foot, 600 square foot to be built. What is that? That's a Class A apartment. And all an apartment is, if you think about it, is a bunch of tiny homes stacked on top of each other that you rent. And so I think to give them an option not to just rent that, again, I'm talking about the two biggest demographic groups, to not only rent 700, 800, 900, 1,100 square feet, but to own that. I mean, my parents' first house was 1,300 square feet. They paid 30 grand for it. They were able to sell that and build wealth and sell another one and build wealth. And that's how you built wealth as a country forever. I did the same thing. And we've kind of taken that rung off the ladder for that starter couple, whether they have small kids or no kids, to kind of get in the game, because we don't build that house anymore.
How do
We should.
we get, this is maybe for all three of you, because if we want to take this argument to our city council leaders and our zoning folks, let's talk about the stigma associated with affordable housing. That's something that Brian DeSaro wanted to talk about. I mean, there's a stigma that is attached to it, and that a lot of folks might just need some education on what it means for the communities. John, we'll start with you, and then we'll run the table on that one.
Well, so we're asked the question, how are we going to affect change? And I'm very pleasantly surprised by the change we've seen. Kind of zoning reform is sweeping the country right now, so I'm excited by that. There are a lot of places where it's not, but I think over time this is going to kind of fix itself. And I hate to be this way, but some people just have to retire, go away, and be replaced by my millennial children and Gen Z children, who then come into city councils and county commissions, and they will, let me tell you something, they will do something different when they get in there, because they're just a different group, and they seek diversity. And I think that's what's seeping in, is we're getting younger and younger people on leadership positions in city councils, county commissions, and municipalities across the country. That's affecting some of this change.
John Paul, if you had the ear of city council leaders or decision makers, what is your message when it comes to this issue in terms of zoning, in terms of regulations?
Yeah, I mean, I think my message is that affordable housing means different things. It does not mean one thing. I think when people hear it, the first thing they think about is, low rent apartments. Well, we have those, but that doesn't solve my issue. I don't have nurses, coming down here to live in low rent apartment. They don't have affordable housing, but that's not it. It could be part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. And I think when I have those conversations, it's around understanding that we have different different income levels throughout, our service that need to be met in different ways. And, what we're doing right now is just unfortunately not meeting all of the needs of all of the people that work for me. But it means a lot of different things. And I think that's the main message. It's not a single solution type message. And I also remind people, especially people who have kids, all the time people will say, "Oh, I've got, so and so is graduated. My daughter's graduated. She's a nurse." I'm like, "That's great. She should come live here." And they'll say, "Well, she's living in Gainesville because she can't find a place to live down here, so she's working up there." Well, that's great for her, but but the challenge is these are their own children are not able to come back and find that housing unless they're living, with them in the basement, which is another issue.
Dr. Looney, you also have a very strong voice in the community. So if you had the ear of, public officials, what would you tell them about, the housing needs and what you see is the demand?
But I don't think there's a one size fits all here. I think it's a spectrum of things. As a large employer, I think it's incumbent upon us to think differently. How do we start providing perhaps housing allowance for people that want to live and work close to, the school that they work at or location they want to work at? How do we have, developments, buildings, incentives for first responders, safety and law enforcement, teachers and firemen to want to live? What incentive is there, to have those individuals in the community and the neighborhood? So I don't know if that's a different way to look at, affordable housing, but maybe housing for, these individuals that do something larger for the broader community. And obviously, how do we continue to have those conversations with our city and council officials that housing, and I don't think it's lost on anybody, housing is a major disruptor to business continuity, not just for schools, but for anybody in business in the region. And it's going to take all of us working together.
Maybe we'll wrap it with the questions here, but maybe one last question is, if we don't solve this problem, if we don't look at this problem, if we don't have solutions, John, where are we in 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, the trajectory is not good in terms of just the price point trajectory. Again, we're in 45 cities, and I speak in all of them. It's interesting to go to places like Greenville or Huntsville or Richmond and second and third tier cities that are far less expensive to do housing in terms of development based on, just a lower level of government intervention. So I'm concerned about Atlanta in the future. We could lose competitiveness to these second and third tier cities. It's already happening. The pandemic has made it so you can live and work from anywhere. So, we've got to maintain that edge to be the super wonderful, cool city that we've always been. And I think, like Mike said, this is an all hands on deck issue. There's not one answer. It can't be done by just one. It's going to take public, private. Again, this has to be addressed. And I think we're a smart animal and we can figure it out.
John Paul, any closing remarks here?
Yeah, it is a multifaceted challenge. I think I think what we're doing today is very important. Having an open discussion about what it is, understanding that there are differences across industries. And there are industries like Dr. Looney's industry and my industry where, people have to physically come into work. And, we provide, services to the community, and we try very hard to make them the very best services. And in order to do that, it's important to us to have people that are not just committed to our industries, but are also committed to our communities too. That makes a big difference when I have people that work here that also live in the community, and they're invested, and that's a long-term investment for everybody. I just think open conversation, having these types of discussions, and then, working through what are multiple solutions to this.
Great points. Dr. Looney.
Once again, I think it's been said. I also think, this what comes with this conversation is a conversation about transportation. How do we not just increase housing, but how do we make transportation a little bit more seamless for those people that are going to commute? I don't know that we can solve it all with housing, but it's going to just take the entire region working together, and we stand ready to do that.
John, I have one more question. I promised these folks this is their webinar. So just real quickly, if you could, just about workforce housing. I mean, is it realistic that we could build villages, designated for teachers, nurses, policemen, firemen? Could that be something that would be a solution? Could it be common?
Yeah, and I think, again, we're on the cusp of this, but my dad's first job was at Lockheed. Lockheed built houses around the Marietta plant for their workers. We've heard Amazon talk about doing the same thing. I think that could be another part of the solution where, if you've got the wherewithal, you go in and start your own housing. I think that's how we did it a long, long time ago, and we may see that coming back.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for all of your time. We really appreciate the insight. This has been very eye-opening for all of us, I think. So thank you so much. Just a reminder again that about rerunning this presentation, we will be hosting and posting this event on the NFIN YouTube channel very shortly. So you'll receive an email notification. So you can view it again, you can share it. We welcome your input. We've got one more survey question if you don't mind taking it. We'd like to take today's information and really move it into a discussion about potential solutions and what's really working in other regions. And I know some of you in the chat are weighing in about North Carolina doing other things. So our next event will be about moving past what we don't support and considering things that we might agree on. So as we plan the Solutions Summit, we just want to know, what format do you prefer? Do you prefer in-person? Do you prefer virtual, or do you just not have a preference? Also, what kind of additional home type would you support in your city? This is a very good question. And you can click all that apply here. Single family homes, cottage homes, townhouses, small multiplex, tiny houses, or no new housing. And another question, how much do you know about what your city is doing about housing? You're very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar at all. So if you could answer those questions, that would be great. Of course, stay tuned to your inbox for more information about future events. In the meantime, and I think it's really important that you share some of what we've learned today with others. As you know, we have an opportunity to influence the strategies and plans for our community, but only if we listen, we learn, we share, and we speak up, especially to the decision makers in our communities. We welcome you to follow us on the various social platforms as well, and to share your thoughts and ideas. Thanks again to our speakers, our sponsors, our technical team, and for all of you for spending your morning with us. Thanks.